So it looks like Games Workshop have 100% confirmed Primaris and drop pods with this new image. We know that they're in Land Raiders and Repulsors now, though it's good to have confirmation they will be freely dropping from the skies. Let's talk about some new combos for the Space Marines and examine a few interesting tentacles in the background of this image. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking about Drop Pod Primaris. It's one of the most interesting outcomes to Games Workshop's new Space Marine transport changes, kind of implied by their last teaser, though not 100% confirmed. Now it looks like it is, and in the same image that they did confirm it, it looks like there's a few interesting Tyranid bits lurking in the background. I've been sent this by a few people asking if these were new units, though I'd say the boring answer is probably not. First up, the main news is that Games Workshop has 100% confirmed that Primaris and drop pods is a thing. We did get that transport article about the Space Marines the other day, how they were saying they were going to allow Repulsors and Land Raiders to transport both Primaris and Firstborn Space Marines of most stripes, even things like Centurions in Repulsors, for example. They did list a bunch of exceptions to that policy, and apparently the Rhino, Razorback, and Impulsor are all going to be locked to certain units still, unfortunately, but not on that list was the drop pod, kind of implying that it probably would allow you to put Primaris in it. Though it is kind of nice to have the confirmation, the drop pod is definitely a bit more Firstborn scaled, to be honest, and if they're locking things like the Rhino and Razorback to Firstborn, it wouldn't have been the biggest stretch in the world to say that they'd do the same with the drop pod. Fortunately though, and quite fun for the Space Marine army, it looks like you can have Intercessors and Friends piling out of drop pods now. Games Workshop gave us this image which shows a whole bunch of Intercessors disembarking from one, and asks us which sort of Primaris units we'd most like to put in them. In the image there's 10 Intercessors getting out alongside a Terminator Librarian. I do honestly think that the Terminator Librarian is probably just teleported down, to be honest. I don't think he's going to be able to go in the drop pod. They can't take Terminators currently, and between him and the other Space Marines they'd have more Space Marines than there are harnesses, so I don't think he's going to be able to rise. Let's talk Space Marine combos, but in the meantime I thought I'd just quickly touch on a couple of Tyranid things lurking in the background, which certainly had a few people interested. The two bits that I've seen discussed are the bit on the top right, a little tentacle claw looming round the corner. It looks like it's got 3 little teeth on it, plus some other little talons too, and also potentially this Tyranid lurking behind the drop pod. The one on the top right I think was more interested to me, as it actually looked like something rather than the drop pod one, which you can't really tell what it is too well. Unfortunately though, for people keen for yet more Tyranid organisms to pour into the invasion, it does look like this one is a previous Games Workshop terrain kit from their Death World set. Looks like it's this little tri-clawed tongue type thing alongside the edge of the plant which has the little talons. I guess it's just there to put a bit of a Tyranid backdrop to the battlefield. Unfortunately it doesn't look like it's a new unit. Otherwise, the little bit behind the drop pod, I think either way doesn't really give us any big information. My guess is that again it's just another Termagant. You can see the base towards the bottom of the orange circle here. I guess it could potentially be Rippers, I suppose. I must say it looks like that carapace bit doesn't track enormously well onto any one Termagant bit. So maybe this could be a tiny teaser of potentially models that also come in the box. It certainly seems pretty reasonable that Rippers could be on the same sprue as the Termagant still. That's where they come at the moment, and it would have a bit of a parity to the Necron Warrior set that was released in Indomitus. That came with the standard Necron Warriors plus some Scarab Swarms as well. Either way, it's maybe not the biggest value reveal, you can't really see anything new out of it. I'll be interested to hear your guys' takes though. Is it a Gaunt or a Ripper? Let me know down in the comments. In any case though, back to the actual confirmed news, I do feel like Primaris riding in drop pods is rather exciting. I've always felt it just to be a little bit sad that Primaris have so far been locked out of one of the most iconic ways that Space Marines wage war. Seems just maybe a bit curious that they were excluded from them in the first place. For in-game tactics wise, at least at the moment, drop pods tend to be best for fragile shooting units, things that you really want to get into the enemy early, maybe need line of sight and have a short range, and usually things that you want to guarantee get the alpha strike on the enemy as opposed to the other way round. For the most part, full drop pods assaults just don't tend to be enormously viable just due to the sheer amount of points that you need to pay for pods. Not that that's guaranteed going forward, I suppose. Just based on the actual model plus the history that it's had, I'm pretty certain that it won't be able to transport either Gravis or Terminators. That still would leave a whole load of Primaris units that could be potential targets. Games Workshop hasn't really clarified this area of army construction yet, but I guess that dedicated transports might well be actually just locked to an individual unit each. So a drop pod could potentially have a unit list of different things that might be able to take one as a dedicated transport, as opposed to heavy support units like the Land Raider and Repulsor. That still leaves us with loads though. Here's just a short list of the Primaris units that have the standard pattern Mark 10 armor. In the troops we've got intercessors and assault intercessors. They seem fairly likely, particularly the standard ones, which are basically confirmed being in the picture. I guess there's the chance that the Phobos units might be able to ride. Things like Reavers, Infiltrators, Incursors and Eliminators. I feel like they're maybe a little bit less likely though, depending on keywords. Otherwise, heavy support like Hellblasters and Desolation squads. Elites like Veteran Intercessors and Blade Guard Veterans. Kind of intriguingly, those teased new units that we saw in the reveal trailer. I think the Pyreblaster Flamer Primaris and the Combi Weapon Primaris could be kind of good. Attached Mark 10 armoured characters, like things like the Primaris Lieutenants, and potentially a few chapter locked elements like Black Templar Sword Brethren, Death Company Intercessors, or Hounds of Morkai. In terms of optimal targets out of that massive list though, maybe a few do present themselves a bit more than others. In general, at least by current reserve rules, I'd generally be a bit less inclined to put in things like melee units in there. From what we've seen of the new 10th reserve rules, it still looks like that 9-inch maximum drop is still in effect, so that would mean that they'd have a pretty unlikely chance to get into combat, around 28% from a single roll, or around 48% if you can budget a command point reroll. It's certainly not nothing, and the chance for a first turn charge is pretty big, but for the most part I don't think armies will usually be able to afford that kind of risk. A 50-50 chance that you've just invested tons of points in a pod plus a fancy unit, and then just sat it right by the enemy army all ready to take a bunch of damage just doesn't seem very productive. I think overall it just means that Blade Guard, Assault Intercessors, and Melee Primaris in general just aren't going to be quite as tempting. I suspect that they'd probably be better just foot slogging up the board, or taking on the board transports like Impulsors or maybe even Land Raiders with that nice new assault ramp rule. I guess one potential thing that might go against that is that rapid ingress stratagem, but again I honestly suspect it's not going to be super helpful for melee primaris out of a drop pod. It looks like you probably would be able to use it to arrive the pod in the enemy turn if you needed to. Then the idea would usually be to put the melee unit somewhere out of line of sight and all ready to charge in your turn. I feel again though this is probably going to be overinvestment. You're going to need to pay the points for the pod, then the command points to use this stratagem, both of which on top of each other seem like quite a lot. Plus the stratagem itself is kind of situational I think, usually going to be helpful on a lot of boards, but against some armies it just might not be necessary, and then you've set up your drop pod with a unit that guarantees that you need to use this, and you potentially just might not have a suitable bit of terrain for your unit to hide behind, or you might not need to use the whole thing in the first place. I guess it could potentially be interesting to jump on or defend an objective early, but still it just seems super pricey for what you're going to be doing. Otherwise though, again if drop pods tend to follow how they do at the moment, you'll generally want to be packing in as much high value into the pods to get the most out of it. That's why at the moment we usually see things like the Devastator squads or Stern Guard veterans jumping out of drop pods. They're all high value models with good shooting attacks, and it means that you're just getting a bit more transporting value out of the pod than say if you put in things like Tactical Marines, which a lot of them don't actually have that great shooting. For the most part, I guess that would mean that usually you wouldn't be tempted massively to put in things like Phobos units or Intercessors. I guess it certainly doesn't hurt to have a squad just turn up to an objective and put loads of that objective control down onto it. But still, with things like transports moving and disembarking, I feel like other transports are going to be better for that. Overall though, I do suspect that things like close range shooting does seem pretty great out of drop pods. Again, it still looks like it'd compete a fair bit with things like moving and shooting with things like Impulsors, but these could give you some pretty amazing choice of where you come in, and do pretty well guarantee you the Alpha Strike compared with transports that could get shot down early. Out of the Primaris shooting units, I feel like the Hellblasters are perhaps the biggest winners that we've seen at the moment. They've got a pretty dangerous damage profile that's going to threaten most targets. They might well be wounding a lot of vehicles on 5s now, but I'm sure they'll still at least be able to do some damage to them. I feel like they're going to be much more general purpose threats than say things like Intercessors at least. They certainly seem like they're packing a bunch of points as well, so look like they will be a good fit there too. Otherwise, for the Primaris shooting units, I feel like most things aren't that dangerous. Desolation squads likely want to be starting on the board, as they've got barrage weapons that they could be getting stuck in with early, so don't really want to have to move out of pods. And to be honest, actually, some of the best targets for putting in a Primaris drop pod might well be two of the units that we've not seen yet. On paper, that Flamer Primaris unit with the Pyreblasters looks like it could be interesting. We saw them in the Tyranid trailer with entire squads of Marines with Flamers. That's quite a good combo with drop pods most of the time, short range overcome by getting exactly where you need to be. The other one as well could be those Primaris combi weapon veterans, basically looking like the equivalent of Primaris Stern Guard. Again, close range shooting that should hopefully be at least a little bit general purpose. If they do pack a punch up close, which I'd guess that they would, then they look like, again, they'd be another great target for a pod. In any case, it'll be interesting to see how popular drop pods are in the new edition, particularly as they might have a bit more competition now for transports on the board, which can also do a bit of movement and dropping, so might well be filling a similar role. Let me know which units you'd be most tempted to put in a drop pod now they can transport Primaris. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Allspecs Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Allspecs Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.